One of the things that trips people up is the fear of failure and like letting failure dictate how they're going to live the rest of their life. I know like early in your career in CIA, you had a massive failure and that could have made or break you, right? And I think you were able to use that to your advantage. To talk about how you like essentially erased your fear of failure.
Yeah, it's a big part of my book, Shadow Cell, and a big part of my own healing process in writing the book was being able to kind of expose or share my massive failure with the whole world, especially after spending so much time as kind of a media personality. Nobody ever asks you about your failure on camera. So I wanted to write a book about it and make sure people understood front and center that my success all started from failure first. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I erased my fear of failure. I would say that I kind of shifted how I view failure away from it being a negative and towards it being a positive. And that's how CIA views a lot of challenges. CIA is an agency of last resort, which means by the time somebody tasks CIA with an operation, everybody else that's been tasked with that operation has already failed. The military has failed, FBI has failed, the local law enforcement has failed, NSA has failed. Nobody can do the job. So they give it to CIA as a last resort. For that reason, 90% of what CIA does doesn't work. The vast majority of CIA operations actually fail. So we have to be able to forgive ourselves and learn from our failures because we were basically built to fail. That's not different from the average human being. Whether we want to admit it or not, every one of us was built to fail. How did we learn how to walk? By falling a lot. How did we learn how to ride our bikes? By skinning our knees and skinning our elbows. We learned how to type by doing it slowly. We learned how to spell by making typos. We've all learned through failure. And yet, for some reason, socially, our society programs us to think that failure equals bad instead of failure equals good. So when I went to CIA and went through my field tradecraft course, where I learned how to be an overseas intelligence officer, when I went through that course, I passed all the academics, but I failed the panel interview. The panel had to vote for me to be awarded the certificate to operate. And they decided in a split decision that I didn't qualify. So in the eyes of CIA, I did not get my certification. In the eyes of CIA, I failed. In my own eyes, I failed massively. But what ended up happening was because I was fully trained and fully academically qualified for field operations, I ended up being a huge benefit in terrorist operations and proliferation operations and narcotics operations all around the world because I was somebody who could do the job without having to compete against other people for the career promotion. So it ended up being this incredible opportunity that led to me being assigned the shadow cell operation.
And what was like the biggest mistake you think you made during that panel interview that led to you being cut?
It's easy, without a doubt. The biggest mistake I made is that when people told me I did something wrong, I defended myself. Without a doubt, that was my biggest error. And for all the argumentative people out there who will die on a cross defending themselves, take it from me, just shut the fuck up. Nobody cares about your defense. Once somebody accuses you of something, whether they accuse you of being rude, or they accuse you of being selfish, or they accuse you of cutting corners, or they accuse you of not being serious, once they accuse you, the story in their brain is over. You cannot convince them otherwise. The best thing you can do is to simply acknowledge what they have told you and promise that you will learn from it. The people who succeed at CIA don't succeed because they're perfect. There were people who got certified by the panel who performed worse than I did throughout all of FTC training. The difference was when an instructor went up to them and said, "Hey, you f***ed this up," that person said, "I did. I'll work on it. I'll get better next time." Whereas when an instructor came up to me and said, "Andy, you f***ed this up," I'd be like, "No, no, no. Let me explain what I was thinking. Let me tell you why I did that. Let me show you how smart I am." At the end of the day, nobody wants to work with a person like that. So my biggest mistake at the farm was by far defending myself and having an ego that made me feel like I had to explain my intentions when I should have just agreed with everybody else's criticism and had my own internal mechanism for not letting it weigh me down.
Do you think at the root of that comes back? It comes back to what we're talking about now. Is like you had this fear of failure that they would see you as a failure if you didn't admit you were wrong.
And you would be labeled as a failure, right? I mean, what is a grade point average in school? It's a number, a numerical empirical value that shows how much you have failed. Have you failed just a little bit and you're a 3.8, or have you failed a lot and you're a 1.5? It's not a label for success. Nobody celebrates having a 3.2. You either have a 4.0 or you suck. That's basically how it works, right? So society labels us and society gives us this fake index that we have to run through where everything is either a complete success or graduated failure. And some people just fail less and some people fail more. So without a doubt, there was this element of that carryover where I didn't want to admit error because admitting error is admitting failure. And I didn't want to admit failure because people who get hired by CIA can't be failures.
I know that story of failure kind of haunted you throughout your career. Talk about how that would come up and how you managed that so that it wouldn't overtake what you were trying to accomplish.
One of the things that people don't realize about CIA is it's still a career. So all the bureaucratic nonsense, all the political infighting, all the favoritism and nepotism that you see in your everyday life, whether it's a small business or a big corporation, whether it's an academic setting, whether it's an investment setting, all the stuff that pisses you off about having to play the game inside your job 100% exists inside CIA also. It's still a game of metrics and friends. It's still about who you know and what opportunities you're given. It's still about hitting certain key performance indicators so that you can qualify for promotion. So when I failed the farm and went into the general CIA pool of talent, I was constantly kind of haunted by this idea that I had already failed the big bad, you know, uh, jet pilot version of CIA. So now, whenever anybody else looks at me, they're just going to look at me as the guy who washed out. They're just going to look at me as the guy who failed. So that put a gravitas on me that made me kind of uncaring and insensitive to the operations and to the mission. I was just doing a job. I was just punching in and punching out. And the fact that I had some things that I was skilled at, and the fact that I built a reputation that people liked in some parts of the agency was kind of lost on me because I was just trying to get through the day. It wasn't until much later in my agency career when I really realized that failure from the farm was a huge blessing. Only after that did I start leaning into my job again and start leaning into working extra hours and taking extra risks and really caring about the mission. So for a solid 3 years, I was at the agency just going through the motions, and it's a hard place to be.
But there were times like throughout your journey where I feel like you were on the slippery slope of like self-sabotage, right? Like even when you thought you were being caught, the story in your mind was already going to like what they were going to do to you, even though like that wasn't happening and it in fact didn't happen. Like how do you think people can prevent like that gap between like failing and then completely like destroying their life with self-sabotage because they're convinced their life is going to go a different direction?
Yeah, self-sabotage is a very real thing, and it's heavily tied to what we discussed earlier, Doug, with the idea of the left brain and the right brain moving at different speeds. When we let our brains tell us a story, we have to understand that that story is a creative endeavor. So the fact that you're telling yourself a story means it's coming from the creative part of your brain, not the logical part of your brain. So you have to start to test the two different sides of your brain. Let me just give you kind of a silly example, right? Um, I went to a music festival recently, a 3-day music festival. And when I was at the festival, this cute little 20 something girl, she recognized me from YouTube. And she came up to me, and she didn't come like excitedly running up to me or anything like that. She just came up to me and she was like, "Excuse me, are you Andrew Bustamante? I think I've seen you on YouTube." And that turned into like a conversation for maybe 30 minutes or so about how she saw me on YouTube and her interest in psychology and human behavior and whatever, whatever, whatever. Anybody who's talked to a girl in their mid 20s, it's kind of empty and shallow conversation about her interests. That's basically what the conversation was for about 30 minutes. Well, that was the first day of a 3-day festival. So every day of the festival, I would see her and we'd have another conversation for another 30 minutes or an hour. And we might have 2 or 5 or 10 conversations over the course of the 3 days. Well, by the end of the first full day, I'm sitting there and we're talking so often and so much that I'm wondering if this girl is flirting with me. And I'm like, is this young girl really flirting with my old 45-year-old? Because that would be really awkward. And not only that, I'm married. I have no idea how to flirt back. So if I'm like, maybe I'm making an out of myself and not even realizing it. Well, then I reflected on that and I started saying, okay, let's do that false dichotomy. There's two options here. Either she is flirting or she isn't flirting. There is no other what if that matters. So if she's flirting, then what objective things would I see? Well, I would see smiles and I would probably see touching and I would certainly see, flipping of the hair and putting on cute outfits. Like I would see other indications of flirtatious behavior. I'm not seeing those things. Therefore, I have to give up on the idea that she's flirting and focus instead on the fact that she's really just interested. She's not flirting. She's just interested in whatever, a job, a network connection, who knows what. Well, once I objectively kind of walked myself through what is evidence of success and what is evidence of failure here, that's when I saw that this is just a curious 20-something who's got their own ideas and their own interests and whatever else. Especially when I saw her actively flirting with other people, and I was like, "Oh, this is definitely a normal person." The reason I bring up this story is because when we self-sabotage, we usually self-sabotage by telling ourselves a story that isn't there. We tell ourselves our boss hates us. We tell ourselves there's a coworker working against us. We tell ourselves there's no way the bank would ever approve our loan. We have to recognize that that's just a story. You have to test that story against objective facts and then follow what the facts tell you. If you have a good credit rating, the bank might say yes. If you have, if you're just not talking to your boss, then of course you're going to feel like your boss doesn't like you. It just goes on and on.
What have you found to be like the most effective like way to kind of like hack your brain or your mind when you're like in that spiral of self-sabotage to help you feel confident again?
You have to ground yourself to objective facts. When you feel like you're panicking and when you feel yourself spiraling out of control, the most important step to interrupt that cycle is to label it what it is. And to label it, I am spiraling out of control. I am getting emotional. You have to call it what it is. If you don't call it what it is, all you're doing is feeding the spiral. So you can't sit there and worry about, what happens if my house catches on fire and then start wondering, well, what if it starts from the toaster? And what if it starts from somebody not, or the broken water heater? Or what if my kids didn't unplug their lamp? Whatever it might be, you've got to realize the fact that I'm even thinking this question right now shows that I'm paranoid. This is not normal. There's no reason for me to think that this is going to happen. Let's look at the facts. And once you start looking at the facts, you're basically taking your attention off of the emotion and you're putting your attention onto the facts. And that very simple shift of your intentions and your attention, that very simple shift immediately starts to slow down that right side of the brain.
I look at my own life and talking about failure and like I had 21 jobs by the time I was 21. I was incarcerated on felony drug charges. And in my mind, I was convinced that I was a failure because on paper it was. Like you talked about the GPA, you talked about like being judged at CIA. Because the fact was like I was like I couldn't keep a job. My relationship sucked. I was a drug addict. I'm in jail. But then it's like I'm trying to think of myself as not a failure, but yet it was so hard because up until that point in my life, I had proven to myself that I couldn't really like accomplish like anything. Like I was fortunate to be in jail and have a guy who was my cellmate get me into fitness, and that got me on this jumpstart the transformation. But a lot of people don't have the good fortune of having like a mentor like that in a very vulnerable, when you're in a very like kind of vulnerable state. Like, what is your advice to someone who has continued to like quote unquote fail over the years and their brain is just wired because of their actions and their behaviors to think that no matter what they do, they're not going to succeed?
CIA teaches us that there is a natural talent in every person. And that natural talent doesn't mean that you're the best in the world at something. It just means that there are certain things that you can naturally do that will help build positive momentum. And the idea of momentum is really important at CIA because momentum is what replaces motivation. It's what replaces ambition. It's what replaces drive because momentum is automatic. So when you describe, Doug, that somebody introduced you to fitness and that was the jump start on your road to transformation, what you're talking about is momentum. You didn't even have to try to get excited for working out most of the time. It was just easy. It was fun. It was relaxing. It was liberating. It was enjoyable. It was distracting. There are always days that you have to get yourself pumped up for leg day. But generally speaking, the rest of it was kosher. It was easy. We all have a natural talent like that. For some people, it's writing. For some people, it's being on camera. For some people, it's creating videos. For some people, it's painting. For some people, it's walking dogs or training dogs or mowing grass. You name it. Everybody has some natural talent that builds momentum. What CIA does for its field officers is during our training process, it finds that momentum builder for us. And then it helps us leverage that momentum to do other great things. When you're dealing with repetitive failure in the field, right? When an average, typical, everyday person is failing or feels like they have a reputation of being a failure, all that really means is you have not yet found your source of momentum. You have found all these other things that are not your source of momentum. A 9 to 5 job, not your source of momentum, right? Having to file taxes, not a source of momentum. Having to wake up at 6 a.m., not a source of momentum, right? You have a huge list of things that don't work for you, which means that you're getting closer and closer to finding the thing that really will be your source of momentum. One of my favorite types of people to talk to, Doug, are criminals, ex-cons, because when somebody gets into crime, it's almost always because they found that some element of that criminal activity was natural to them. The lying, the hiding, the late nights, the convincing other people to join you, some part of it was natural to them. And it was so easy that they became criminals without even really realizing it. So I'm curious if that's something that resonates with you.
It does because I think like growing up it was just kind of normal for me to numb the pain and to hide my emotions and to hide my feelings, and I was able to do that with drugs. And the other thing too for me was I had this need to be loved that I didn't feel like I got as much when I was younger, and because of that I chased after selling drugs to be able to feel wanted and needing. So I kind of all comes back, right, to these innate desires that I had. And I think eventually I just had convinced myself that what I was doing was okay. And in order to protect my ego and my story, I had to like manipulate other people and lie to them and convince them that like whatever I was doing was the right thing.
And you built that momentum from what you said. It came easy to you, right? It was natural.
It was very natural for me and easy because I was somebody that I liked numbing the pain, and that momentum, like the same type of momentum you build in a positive direction, also goes in the negative direction too. And for me, those things just became easy. It became easy to like falsely charm people and get people to like me because that's what I needed. I needed to get people to like me. So in order to do so, I did some of the things that I did when I was younger.
And it's fascinating because, people don't connect the dots here, but what you're talking about are all creative endeavors. Creative means right brain endeavors. When you're trying to be charming, when you're trying to get people to like you, when you're trying to persuade others to trust you, all of those are creative efforts, just like painting a picture or cooking a meal or, changing the lighting in your studio. Those are all creative endeavors. And it's really important to understand that because we live in a society that does not value creative effort. We live in a society that values STEM, that values science and technology and engineering and math, all these logical left brain activities. But those left brain activities are not what actually creates momentum for you. Nobody builds momentum by solving 7 math problems correctly in a row. We build momentum because we're proud of ourselves for understanding the math problems, and then we're excited to try new problems. That's all creative energy, not logical energy.
And speaking of being like creative, it seemed like from reading the book, and again, like I don't know the full time frame. I'm sure some of it was just condensed for the purpose of the book, but it seemed like you got that mission done rather quickly. Where I was reading, I was like, man, this would take me like 2 decades to like figure this all out and connect all the dots and the missing pieces. And I imagine like CIA teaches you to be like hyper efficient. Um, like how can the average person like take that as far as like, you know, condensing time so that they can accomplish like a lot in a short amount of time?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just having this conversation recently with somebody who's an author, and it's not that CIA teaches us to be hyper efficient. In fact, it teaches us kind of the opposite, because hyper efficiency means that you're more focused on the process than the outcome. Instead, what CIA teaches us is it teaches us to balance hyper focus and something called hyper awareness. So, two extremes on a spectrum. On one extreme, you are hyper aware, which means you are very cognizant of what's happening around you. And on the other end, you're hyper focused, which means you're so focused on the thing that you're doing that you're utterly blind to what's happening around you. You can really start to see how completely different these things are. Now, what's fascinating is that when you learn how to balance these two, which doesn't mean you do both at the same time, it means you do one or the other. You are either hyper focused or you are hyper aware. When you learn how to do the two, what you find is that activities that are hyper focused build up your energy reserves. So, for people who love to read, when they read for hours on end, they put the book down and they're energized. For people who love to play music, for people who love to cook, for people who love to hang out with their best friend, you can do it for hours, hyper focused. And when you're done, you have energy to last days. Hyper awareness is incredibly energy draining. So when you're sitting at work, pretending like you want to be there, hoping that nobody identifies that you're sleeping at your desk, you just get more and more tired, because that hyper awareness, that worry about what's happening around you all the time. What's that lady thinking? What's that person doing? Is the camera catching me? What time is it? That hyper awareness becomes a very exhausting experience. CIA teaches us you have to do hyper awareness activity. So the only way that you're going to fuel yourself for the hyper awareness is by doing hyper focused activity also. To answer your question, for our book Shadow Cell, that entire operation that we document in the book took place over the course of approximately 2 years. We got an incredible amount of work done in 2 years because of exactly what we're talking about now, Doug. We were hyper aware when we were in a hostile foreign country, and it was exhausting. And then we were hyper focused when we were preparing to go into that country and run our operations. And by bouncing back and forth between hyper awareness and hyper focus, we always maximized our energy reserves, maximized our focus, maximized our success, so that when we got into the country to do the hard work, we had the most results.
So how can like the average person like put that into practice in their day-to-day life?
Let me give you a really funny, simple example, right? Um, One of the best ways to be hyper focused is when you're watching a movie or when you're binging your favorite TV show, which, let's be honest, most people do that naturally. Most people go back to their home, go back to their apartment on the weekends or after work. They lock the front door. They make themselves whatever, a cup of tea, or they crack open a beer, and they'll watch 3 or 4 of their favorite shows. They'll watch 4 hours, 6 hours, 2 hours of television. What they don't realize, though, is that that period of time is building up their energy. It's why they get up kind of antsy. It's why they're like, oh, like, I wonder if anybody wants to go out. I have energy to watch another movie, right? That hyper focus is building up your energy. The problem is that in everyday life, people don't direct that energy into something that is energy draining, that is also productive, right? Being hyper aware because you're self-conscious at work, that's not a good way to use the energy that you saved from watching Netflix the night before. Instead, you should use that hyper awareness to start looking for a new job, start building a new business, actually write the book you've been talking about writing for the last 3 years, right? Do something that is exhausting because it builds up it drains the energy that you've built up from your hyper focus. If you don't like going to the gym, go to the gym, because going to the gym is going to make you very aware of how weak your muscles are and how easily you get fatigued. And then go back home and watch another couple of movies and build your energy back up again, and then go back to the gym again. And if you can go through this process, you're going to have incredible results. But instead, people just, they're they're using the energy they save to just make it through a miserable day. There's no future for the person who does that.
Would you say it's the main reason people don't succeed in life and they limit themselves?
100%. That is the reason that there are so few success stories in life. Traveling around the world with the agency and meeting people from all over the world, meeting adversaries and allies alike, it becomes very clear that there is a type of person who succeeds and there is a type of person who doesn't succeed. And the type of person who succeeds is not smart. They're not handsome. They're not dedicated. They're not blessed. They didn't come from money. That's not the stereotype. The stereotype is that the hyper successful person is the person who is always trying to build something that they care about. And it may take them 10 years to build it. It may take them 10 weeks to build it, but they're always trying to build something. The who's never trying to build anything is the person who's destined to fail and be a repetitive failure forever. And they don't even realize that they're the cause of their own turmoil. So whether you're talking about an impoverished Indian, or whether you're talking about somebody who comes from the wrong family name in Brazil, or whether you're talking about some, middle Americana, typical middle-aged man, in all cases, they're focused on the wrong thing. They're not focused on trying to build. They're focused on trying to survive. They're focused on trying to skate by. They're focused on trying to go without creating any waves. And that's not the kind of person who finds success.
We've talked about a lot of different skills that you've learned and acquired at CIA that, have helped you, achieve what you've achieved. What do you think's been the most valuable skill that you've taken from CIA and have applied to what you're doing now?
Absolutely. The most valuable skill that CIA gave me was the ability to look at a situation through the other person's perspective. When you're sitting at a dinner table with your spouse or with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, it's really easy to see the whole scenario from your point of view. You look down and you see the food that you're eating. You know how your stomach feels. You know how your clothes feel on your body. You know if you think the restaurant is hot or cold. You know if you think the background sound is too much or just right. So at CIA, we call all of that your perception. Your perception of the reality that you're in is based on your five senses. The real power comes from being able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and practice perspective, gaining perspective over the entire situation by looking at it through their lens. Okay, I'm in a button-down long sleeve shirt, but my date is in a dress that's got thin straps. I wonder if she's cold. If she is cold, is that why she's ordering hot tea instead of, a glass of wine? And if she's ordering tea, is that, could that be a sign that she's also tired and she needs the caffeine? You start to gain perspective by asking questions you otherwise would never have asked. Another kind of humiliatingly embarrassing story, Doug, when I was in the Air Force, I've always loved women, always loved going on dates, always loved the challenge of trying to meet a girl, get her number, woo a girl, and impress a girl. It's a stupid thing, but it's something that's always been me. I remember that I was always so confused when I was in the military because I would get all these first dates. I would get all these phone numbers. I would have a bunch of first dates, and then they would never talk to me again. I would never have a second date. I would call, I would text, but I would never win a second date. So for some reason, I thought the dates were going so well, but the feedback that I was clearly getting is that the girl did not think the dates were going so well. It wasn't until CIA taught me this idea of perception and perspective that I could sit back and realize, oh, it's because I'm going on these dates and all I care about is me. All I care about is my meal, my level of comfort. I'm picking the restaurants. I'm picking the music in the car. I'm probably talking about myself more than I'm asking questions about her, right? And of course, it makes sense that since I'm not showing that I care at all about her point of view, I'm not winning her trust or her attention. Now, that applies to all of us every day with our kids, with our coworkers, with our bosses, with our clients. We live in a world of our own perception when we need to live in a world of perspective if we intend to succeed.
What's the most effective conversation tactic you learned while you were at CIA?
Oh man, that's such a good question because there were so many tactics we learned about conversation. But I will say that the one that has been the most impactful, not just to me, but also to the clients that I've taught, is something that we call two questions and a confirmation. Two questions and a confirmation. And what this is it's a conversational tactic that allows you to go into any conversation, a conversation with a stranger, a conversation with a longtime friend, a conversation with a current spouse, a conversation with an ex spouse. It allows you to have a conversation that you control that simultaneously builds trust and lets you remain the person who directs where the conversation goes. And it works like this. Two questions is pretty simple. You start with a question. You ask the other person an open-ended question. An open-ended question is a question that doesn't end in a single word. It's not yes or no. It's not what's your favorite color. It's not did you go to, the game on Friday night. Those are close-ended questions. They don't invite conversation. An open-ended question is a question that starts with words like how or why or what. These question words invite more conversation. How did you write your book so fast? What were you thinking when you saw the villain die at the end of XYZ movie, right? These are not one-word answers. So when you're using two questions in a confirmation, you ask an open-ended question first. Then you listen to the person's response. You listen to their answer. That's your first question. Your second question is then a follow-up question based on their response. So when they tell you that they felt sad, or when they tell you that they felt, angry, whatever it was, or when they tell you that they never want to go to the movie theater again, you have a second question that's related to what they just said. And then whatever their answer is to the second question, your technique is to then confirm, repeat, validate what they just said. So, for example, if you say something like, hey, what did you think about the end of Sixth Sense? And then their answer is like, oh, it was amazing. It was such an unexpected twist. I love M. Night Shyamalan. And then you ask a second follow-up question. Have you seen any other of M. Night Shyamalan's movie that you liked as much? And they're like, oh, yeah, Lady in the Water was another really fun movie, even though it was totally different. Well, then you confirm them and you say, yeah, Lady in the Water was a great movie. One of my favorite parts was when they didn't show you the eagle landing, right? What you've just done is without realizing it, without them realizing it, and without you being obvious about it, you've taken their natural interests and you've made them feel like what they are interested in is also interesting to you. And at the core of all of our psychology, we feel like when we are interesting, we are safe. So now you have made that person subconsciously feel safe, which is the first step to building trust.
And do you think this tactic works just as effectively with people that you don't really know versus people that you already have a baseline relationship with?
I don't even have to think it, man. It's empirically proven. So I have a client that I'm very proud of. They're one of the largest dental marketing companies in the world, and I went to visit them in Clearwater, Florida, recently. And when I was in there, I just kind of I visited the CEO, and as I was leaving the CEO's office, one of their salespeople recognized me and was like, "Hey, you're Andrew Bustamante. I saw you speak at our event last year where you taught us two questions and a confirmation." He's like, I use that on every cold call I'm on right now, and it works like a charm. He's like, I cold call people in the middle of their day, two questions and a confirmation later, and we're in the middle of my sales script. He's like, when people used to hang up on me all the time. So I know for a fact, Doug, that it works with strangers just as well as it works with people who know you. If anything, it probably works better with strangers because the person who knows you is wondering, why are you suddenly asking me questions about me?
It's funny. We were out over the weekend, and we could tell that there was a couple there that was clearly on their first date, and this guy did nothing but talk about himself for like 30 minutes straight. And we were looking at each other, and like, I guarantee you, this guy is not getting a second date because it was like zero questions. And if any question, he was like, oh, did you know what I mean? Like it was stuff like that. There was no like real like question about like her and her interests. So obviously like, you know, in that sense, it definitely works, right? Like from there, like how do you, there's so many people that are trying to get people to like them, whether they're out on a date, whether they're in a business meeting, whether they're trying to build new friendships. Like how do you build off of that framework to charm people and get people to like you?
Yeah, I mean, this is coming from the guy who was that guy many, many times. I have been the dumb on the date talking about myself so many times it's embarrassing. I wish CIA would have trained me when I was 21 and single instead of when I was 27 and engaged, right? So that said, it's important to understand that there's really only two types of people in the world from any one person's perspective. There's the person who can uh, help you produce, and then there's the person who can consume your resources. That's it. Only two types. The person who helps you produce the thing that you're trying to produce, or the person who consumes the resources you currently have. If they consume resources that help you in the future, then they're a producer, right? If they only consume and never help you, then they're definitely a consumer. So we have to look at everybody we meet through this lens of, is this person going to help me produce? Are they going to help me produce a better business? Are they going to help me produce more income? Are they going to help me produce a healthy relationship? Are they going to help me produce a family? Is the person you're talking to helping you to produce, or are they just simply helping you to consume? For consumers, do not waste your resources on consumers. Do not waste your charm. Don't waste your techniques. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your talent on people who purely consume. And especially for single guys out there, I get it. Like, it's a very attractive idea to spend a couple of hours with some chick who doesn't really care about you, but who's smoking hot, and your friends get jealous about it. Like, I get the incentive. But if you really want to succeed, you have to find a way to focus on the people who will produce, because there's just as many beautiful, charming women out there that will help you achieve the same kind of ambitions that you're going for. Once you're kind of willing to ruthlessly only pursue productive people, Doug, then you take your two questions and a confirmation, and you take that to the next level by creating an artificial divide. Artificial divide. Any smart spy, just like any smart marketer, will tell you that if you want to create a productive relationship, you have to force the person sitting across from you to make a choice. And that choice is a simple choice: either come with me or get left behind. You have to create that choice. And the only way you can create that choice is by communicating what you believe in and what you don't believe in. If you're the kind of person who nobody really knows what you believe in, nobody knows how you really feel, nobody knows if you really care, nobody knows what you like, or if you're the kind of person that everybody just assumes is like so easygoing that you don't care, oh, that guy will eat anything, that guy will go anywhere, that guy will do whatever. If you're that type of person, nobody really believes that you are going anywhere. So they don't want to partner up with you. They don't see you as a producer. So you have to create an artificial divide. You have to say very clearly, I stand for this, I don't stand for that. When you create that divide, everybody who's working with you, everybody who's engaged with you, realizes subconsciously that if they want to stay working with you, they have to accept that what you believe in is real for you, or they get left behind. The reason CIA wants us to do this is because it limits the number of people that you are engaging at any given time. So it conserves your resources and simultaneously allows you to put more resources into the most productive relationships. And everything else, everything that's a consumer relationship or everything else that is a less optimized productive relationship, all of those things get cut. So how do you apply this in everyday life? Imagine your next date, or imagine the next person you interview to hire them for your company, or even imagine the people that you work with day to day. How many of them actually know what you care about? Even better, if you were to go straight up to them and tell them, hey, I care about a highly productive project delivered on time. If they say, well, I believe in being a few days late to make the best possible outcome. Well, now you know right away. You're like, we are not on the same page. We are not on the same team. So we are not going to be productive together. So if you're the hiring manager, you kick that person out the door and you're like, you're not going to be a good fit for our company culture. And if you're in an office and your coworker that you're assigned with is that different from you, it's time to escalate the problem to your supervisor and be like, hey, I just talked to Gus. Gus thinks it's okay to be late to get a better product. I think we have to be on time. So, boss, which one of us do you want to be in charge of this project?
Do you think that's why there's a lot of advice out there about, in order to be more likable, you have to just quote unquote be yourself? It's because you have to like take a stand for something.
Well, I think there's two kind of cross-pollinating ideas there. First of all, I would say being likable is you don't want to be likable. If anything, you want to make sure that you are as repulsive as possible because the more that you can repel people, the more that the people who are not repelled are going to be a really strong fit for you, right? It's the difference between do you want to sell everybody in the world a $20 trinket because they like you, or do you want to sell 20,000 people a $10 million trinket because they trust you, right? It's a game of odds. It's a game of empirical evidence, right? So I think that when you get that guidance, that kind of campfire guidance, hey, if you want to be likable, just be yourself. They're cross pollinating two ideas. If you are truly just yourself, there's not going to be many people who like you. And you need to be okay with that. And if you want to be likable, then you essentially have to be less and less like yourself and more uh, obfuscated so people don't really know what you believe in. That way they can assume that you believe in what they believe.
Well, and I think I made this huge mistake when I was younger and thought that the more I tried to be a chameleon and morph into what I thought people, wanted for me, or what I thought would get me to be quote unquote liked, the more I realized I was disliked because people could sense that I was acting like a fraud and very out of character. And it wasn't until like I actually started to take a stand for something and say no more often that people actually liked and respected me on a deeper level than before.
Exactly. CIA puts all of us through a very rigorous set of personality and psychological testing in the process of training us. And the reason they do that is because they know when you know your core personality, and we use a Myers-Briggs type indicator and MBTE. When you know your Myers-Briggs personality type, then or MBTI, excuse me, you know what you are like when you have no more resources left. When you're out of money, when you haven't slept, when you're physically ill, when you're tired and frustrated, that's when your core personality comes out. Everything on top of that core personality, you can be a chameleon. Any one of us can pretend to be something we're not. But in order to pretend, it spends a lot of energy. It spends a lot of time. It spends a lot of focus, a lot of cognitive power. And we only have a limited amount of those resources. So when you truly embrace your core personality and you understand your core personality, that's how you can conserve your resources the longest, just like you said. And in that process of being your core personality, one of the things that you don't waste time on is being ingenuine. And people can sense that insincerity.
After reading your book and just watching your content, I understand the importance of being able to like read people. Um, what is your like playbook or your best tactics as far as being able to read somebody like when you're entering into a conversation with them?
One of the best ways to be able to read a person is not by what you see, but by what you hear. When somebody speaks in a way where they don't use a lot of filler words, when someone speaks in a way where they answer a question quickly and kind of impulsively, that's how you know you're talking to a person who's intentionally being honest. They're intentionally reacting to your question. They may not be correct, but they are trying to be transparent. And whether they're trying to be transparent because that's part of their ego or whether it's because they want to be transparent because they trust you is irrelevant. What you hear is so much easier to read than what you see. For example, my wife. I love my wife. My wife is a former CIA officer. She helped me write the book. We wrote the book together from both of our perspectives. She is a brilliant woman on her own. But my wife feels compelled to have to like self filter her opinions. She wants to filter her opinions because she doesn't want people to take things the wrong way. She doesn't want to offend people. She doesn't want to worry people. She doesn't want to give the impression that, somebody might leap to the wrong conclusion. So when my wife answers a lot of questions, especially questions for interviews, you will hear how she slows her speech. You will hear her take long pauses. You will hear her use filler words, like, maybe. Like you'll hear these filler words. And what ends up happening is subconsciously, when you hear somebody speaking like that, you're subconsciously aware that they are holding something back. That's best case scenario. Best case scenario, you assume that they're holding something back. Worst case scenario, you assume that they are educationally dumb. You assume that they're not intelligent and they can't form a proper sentence, right? In both cases, if you're the one communicating, then you lose. And if you're the one trying to get information from the other person, then you're lost, you're confused. So when it comes to reading people, my number one suggestion for all of us is try to close your eyes when you're trying to read the person. Don't look at their face. Look at the floor, look at the wall, look at the ceiling, look at the sky, and focus on what you're hearing. Because a lot of times, what you're looking for, whether they can be trusted or not, you'll find more information from what you hear than what you see.
What's the difference between like lying and manipulation? I know they're similar, but kind of close cousins, right?
Yeah, so it really boils down to understanding the categories of lies. There's a white lie, there's a lie of omission, there's a bold-faced lie, and then there's a lie of misdirection. So there's four types of lies that you can look for in any given time. A white lie is a very light, inconsequential lie, right? Like if I were to tell you I had a very healthy breakfast, that's a white lie. I actually had eggs and toast, no vegetables, no fruit, right? Not nearly enough water. That's just a white lie. It's inconsequential. If I were to just say, um, I'm looking forward to lunch, I'm omitting the fact that I don't really like lunch. I like dinner and I like breakfast. So you can see that like lies of omission and white lies are generally kind of inconsequential. What we're all afraid of is called a bold-faced lie. A bold-faced lie is when I tell you to your face, like, hey, Doug, you're my favorite podcaster, man. Like, that's a bold-faced lie. That's me telling something right to your face that isn't true, that there's a level that you're also like, this probably isn't true, but you can't really argue the fact. You can't argue the fact, right? That's what we're all afraid of. And that's what we think is the most dangerous lie, when in fact, the most dangerous lie is the lie of misdirection. A lie of misdirection is when you take something factual and you spin it so that it directs people in the wrong direction. Sometimes it's also called malinformation or malicious information. When you really talk about someone who is manipulative, you're talking about somebody who uses lies of misdirection so well that they can layer on other types of lies without you really even knowing it, and they get the outcome that's in their best interest. That's what manipulation is. It's when you take an action that is not in your best interest. When you take an action that is in your best interest, that's called motivation. And that's why people hire motivational coaches and they go to motivational speeches, because they want somebody else to inspire and direct them and motivate them to take action.
So would you say that not being upfront and not telling like the whole truth, that's considered like a blatant form of lying?
That's a lie of omission. That's exactly what I'm saying, right? When you have a thought in your head that is truthful and you intentionally don't say that truthful thought for some reason, that is considered a lie of omission, right? I was talking to my mother-in-law, Doug. I was talking to my mother-in-law just this morning, and she's my mother-in-law, so she's older, right? She's in her early 70s, and she was going off about how women are so much better at multitasking than men are, right? She's talking about herself and my father-in-law. She's like, my husband, can't do anything more than one thing at a time. And I've been multitasking. I'm an expert multitasker. I've been multitasking since I was, 17 years old. And I'm sitting here listening to her. And in my mind, I'm like, there has literally been science in the last 15 years that show that nobody's capable of multitasking, right? Like you can read multiple peer-reviewed scientific journal studies that talk about that multitasking is really something known as task hopping, and that it's inherently inefficient, and that you're much better off doing a single task to completion before you move off to the next task. So I know this is happening in my head. She's verbalizing her opinion. I had a moment, Doug, where I was like, if I don't say something, I'm lying to her by omission. Because if I don't say anything, she's going to interpret that as I agree with her. She's going to interpret that as I accept her position. She's going to interpret that as, you're right, women are great at multitasking and men are terrible at multitasking, which is a lie. It's a lie by omission. So I had to tell her the truth. And I had to be like, actually, Madam Mother in law, if you just do a quick Google search about the scientific studies on multitasking, what you'll find is that there's no gender relationship at all. Human beings are not good at multitasking. In fact, they're better when they do one task at a time, which, as you I'm sure can expect, Doug, set her off into a tirade about how wrong I was and how science doesn't know what it's talking about and how in her experience of 70 years, blah, blah, blah. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah, that is the way it goes. And it's like super, unfortunate that sometimes you can't have these conversations, right? And be honest. I think delivery, matters, right? And just being able to like, how are you portraying yourself in that conversation? Are you being able to show like compassion or understanding for their side too, right? Versus like just blatantly, just coming out and directly like giving your position and then like immediately they're going to be on the defensive, right? I think people, as I said a few minutes ago, people like want to see the best in people and believe that everybody has their best interest at heart. Like people, you heard like your grandparents say, just see the best in people, blah, blah, blah. How can like the average person protect themselves from being manipulated?
So I would say the number one thing to understand about manipulation is that manipulation always feels good at first. It's an emotional weakness. That's what people are exploiting when they manipulate you. Um, so as uncomfortable as this might feel, the best way to protect yourself from manipulation is to immediately suspect anytime anytime you feel good, anytime somebody else is saying something or doing something that makes you feel good, you need to immediately suspect that you're being manipulated. If you immediately suspect it right away, you can observe it, you can address it, you can document it, you can reflect on it, and you can come to a different conclusion later on, right? Is the boy really just being nice to you? Does he really care about you as a person? Or is he just trying to get laid, right? Does the boss actually care about your career? Does the boss really think you have talent? Or does he just want you to show up on time and get your done on time because there's a lot riding on this project? You never really know someone's intentions until you've had time to watch the consistency in their behavior. So if you really want to protect yourself from being manipulated, whether you like it or not, the best thing to do is as soon as you feel good, immediately assume the person is manipulating you and then let them prove you wrong with their consistency over time.
There's that book by Dale Carnegie. It's like How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think sometimes people can hear the word influence and manipulation, and maybe I think in our first conversation you were talking about like motivation and manipulation are very similar in how they work, right? Like how can people tell the difference between someone who's trying to influence them to do something like good or beneficial versus somebody who is deceptive and going to be manipulating them down the road?
So a great question. So the difference isn't actually between manipulation and influence. Manipulation is the end goal, right? Remember that the definition of manipulation is getting someone to take an action that benefits them more than it benefits you. That is the definition of manipulation. It has nothing to do with influence. It has nothing to do with bribery. It has nothing to do with social pressure. It has nothing to do with force, even though all of those different things can get someone to take an action that benefits another person more than it benefits you. When you're really talking about influence, you need to compare influence against persuasion. Influence versus persuasion helps you identify the difference between the two because both of them can be used to manipulate a person. So the really good rule of thumb here is when you're engaging in real time, when you're engaging a person in real time, when you're engaging an advertisement in real time, when you're engaging a salesman in real time, they have an opportunity to persuade you. Persuasion can only happen in real time. And persuasion is heavily focused on emotions, emotional hooks, emotional conversations, emotional ploys. People are trying to persuade you by making you feel sad or making you feel angry or making you feel joy. That's persuasion. Influence only happens when you are not directly in contact with a message. So let's say we have a conversation, Doug, and I compliment your podcast and I tell you, hey, you know, one of the things that would really help make your podcast better is if you set up a proper studio behind you. When I talk to you, I have the ability to persuade you and make you feel like you want to put a studio behind you. But once you turn off the camera and you take out your earplugs and you go make yourself a cup of coffee or you go take a dump, you're going to think, I wonder if I should put up a studio. Andy said something about a studio, and these 3 or 4 other people also said something about a studio. That, when you're thinking about me and I'm not in front of you, that's influence. Both being in front of you and being on your mind, both of those can lead to manipulation because manipulation is all about you doing something that doesn't serve your best interests. But persuasion and influence are the two kind of different sides of the coin that most people get confused.
It's really funny you brought up the back of the studio here because I ordered a backdrop like a couple days ago and it came and I was like, there's no way this will work because I'm in an apartment and you can't like damage the wall. So I've been trying to find, like, I've literally been texting people over the last couple of days like, hey, like I'm ready to like, do this, put this podcast studio together here in my apartment, like suggestions on backdrop that wouldn't look like tacky. And so it's really interesting you brought that up because I know that it's on like my to-do list. I just ordered a new shelf like a few days ago. I have a camera. I'm getting a new lens. So like that's all in the works of happening, which is funny, like how you can essentially like read my mind, which is kind of crazy because I literally have the backdrop folded up to return to Amazon. So I was like, there's no way this fake brick is going to look good. Because I'm like, I remember one of my friends who I interviewed had this amazing looking like brick, like backdrop. And I was like, dude, where did you get that? He's like, it's a room in my house. And I'm like, oh, dang. So I was like looking to see if I could get something. So if you have any suggestions on like what you use, I'm totally all ears because I've been searching for the last like week or two of like things to put back here where I can move this shelf behind me with the YouTube plaque over and I have another shelf and get some good lighting and stuff. But definitely open to suggestions.
Well, I mean, I think it's just suggestions aside, I think that this whole conversation is just a really good example of influence because all those friends who said something to you, you thought about them and they're not here. You even talked about them just now and they're not currently in the room with you. So they have been influential in your decision making.
Right. And I think it comes back to, can you be open to feedback? And I think that's one of the biggest, I guess, quote unquote hacks I've had in my life is that I've been very open to like feedback and criticism over the years constructively so that I can better myself because like everyone, I have blinders and I'm like, oh, I'm doing the right thing. But I learned when I was in jail that I didn't have everything figured out clearly. And I knew I needed to have people in my life that could not like guide me, but that I could have to check me when I'm not doing like the right thing and challenge me to be a better person, which, I think is really important in life.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I agree with you that feedback is a bit of a hack as long as you're judicious about where the feedback is coming from.
How have you avoided like negativity as far as feedback from like, how have you been able to compartmentalize to not like negative comments or negativity in your life, like get in the way of what you're doing professionally?
So it's a great question because, I feel like there's this misnomer that we're supposed to avoid negativity, right? I was at a music festival. I was telling you about this earlier. I was at a music festival and I sat with this absolute stoner who was high on life and was telling me about how important it was that he cleanse all the negativity from his life. And he's like, I avoid negative people. I avoid the news because it's negative. I only take jobs that I'm gonna, have fun with. I don't want any negativity because negativity really brings me down, man. And I appreciated what he was saying, but I also understood that it was a little bit misguided because negativity has a ton of value. And if you understand how to make negativity productive for you, then you unlock a massive hack in life. So, for example, what you're doing right now with a podcast and what you do right now with a YouTube channel, negativity, when people put hate speech in the comments, when they call me a phony CIA officer, or they call you a sellout, or they tell us that we're stupid, or they criticize your backdrop or whatever, all that negativity helps us. It helps us because it feeds the algorithm, because it shows the algorithm that people care about what we're talking about or care about this piece of content. So without even knowing it, all these haters out there are boosting the content. Well, if you're looking at the comments and you're seeing these hateful things, it can hurt your soul. It can hurt your spirit. It can hurt your feelings. But you can't focus on what they're saying because what they're saying isn't the value of the negativity. The value of the negativity is that it's going to send your content into the stratosphere, right? And the same thing happens with negativity at work, negativity in relationships. Oftentimes, you can choose the best path forward for yourself based on how much negative resistance you have. If you're trying to start a business and there's a bunch of people who are talking the business, then you know that that is not a receptive business in the marketplace right now. So maybe you need to pivot and go do something else. If you're dealing with a relationship and you find that there's an incredible amount of negativity coming from that person, it gives you a chance to say, are you just a negative person, or is there something about my behavior that I need to address because it's creating this negative feedback cycle? And you can address it. Negativity can really be something that helps you, but if all you do is avoid it, you're basically cutting off all of that information and it can never be used for benefit.
I want to quickly close the loop on like manipulation. Like if you're mid combo with someone and you can just tell that, after a series of conversations, they're trying to manipulate you, what's like your go-to move?
Just leave the conversation. It's really easy to say you have something else to do, someone else to call, you're running late. You just need to extradite yourself from the conversation. And here's what's so sad. I understand that that's easy to say and oftentimes not so easy to do because there's a lot of people out there that feel obligated to stay in a conversation that doesn't serve them. But what I recommend is the same thing CIA taught me. Come up with three sentences that you can use anytime, anywhere to immediately get out of a conversation, right? One of those sentences for me, I look at my watch and I say, oh man, I'm late to call my wife. You're going to have to excuse me for a few minutes because I've owed her a phone call. Now, no one's going to argue with that. No one's going to be like, oh, your wife can wait. No, no, no. Let me continue to manipulate you. They're all like, yeah, you do that. So then I walk out and I call my wife, and I call my wife as I walk out of the restaurant, or I walk to the car, or I walk to a different floor of the hotel, and I'm done with that person, right? But that's an example of one thing that you can use anytime, anywhere, right? To use as an excuse to call somebody, to meet somebody. Oh, I'm about to go meet somebody downstairs. I actually have to get going right now so that I can catch a cab or so that I can see them when they first get here. I don't want to keep them waiting. You can always find a way to escape a conversation. And if you're concerned that your tactic is not going to work, then strengthen your tactic. But we've talked about this before, Doug, the importance of rehearse and prepare, rehearse and prepare, rehearse and prepare. You shouldn't be using these off the cuff the moment you need them. You should be practicing them in the safety of your own bedroom. And you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to say anytime I'm in an awkward conversation. My wife doesn't like to talk to anybody on an airplane. So she always says she's feeling a little bit airsick. And when you tell somebody, hey, I'm feeling a little bit airsick, they all leave you alone because nobody wants you to throw up on them.
What was the scariest moment for you in your story where you felt like things were out of control and you had to like get a grip on your mind?
Yeah, so it's so powerful. So my book, Shadow Cell, when I was going through the process of writing it, it was like this weird sort of cathartic healing exercise where I had to revisit my years at CIA mentally, and then I had to revisit the feelings and the emotions and the highs and the lows and all that stuff. And I put those in the book, but I had to relive those personally along the way. So that's why I really appreciate this question, because the most scary, the most harrowing, the most uncertain point was when I identified that I was under surveillance in an aggressive, hostile country and I was undercover as a CIA officer. So, what nobody talks about in the movies is that you train for events like this and you prepare for events like this. And in the back of your mind, there's like this little kernel of confidence where you're like, oh, I can't wait to use this in the field. I can't wait to actually detect my surveillance. I can't wait till I'm, tip of the spear. But when that moment actually happens, you realize that that confidence is really just a tiny kernel way in the back of your brain. And everything else is so much louder. The worry, the fear, the doubt, the idea that you'll never see your wife again, the idea that you'll never see your kids, the idea that you may never see your own homeland again. Those are all the things that crowded my mind in that moment where I confidently identified I'm under surveillance.
And let's walk it back a little bit. Like I know you were essentially, your unit was brought in to identify a mole from an adversary of the U.S. And, that's what led up to that moment you just described. But like, how did you maintain like your composure when you're in like an enemy's territory to not like give away who you were? And how did you live the day-to-day life without being in so much fear, like minute by minute? Like walk the audience through that.
Absolutely. So one of the first things that CIA teaches its field officers to do is identify risks and then calm your own central nervous system. We all have a sympathetic response to outside stress, and the sympathetic response actually has 4 different responses. Most people only remember the first 2, fight or flight. We all understand that when you're faced with a threat, you either want to run or you want to fight. But there's actually 2 other responses. One is called freeze and one is called feign. So when you freeze, it means that you really don't take any action at all. You don't know what to do. Everything just kind of stops. And for anybody who knows what it's like to freeze in a moment of stress, then you understand that sympathetic response very well. The last one, which is feign, that's you actually start to, or fawn, excuse me, you actually start to try to appease your threat. You try to calm them, you try to soothe them, you try to make them show affection towards you, right? Anytime you've seen a child who gets in trouble and then right away they try to give you a hug, or they immediately beg for forgiveness and they want your approval again, that is a fawning action. So your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, these 4 sympathetic responses all happen in your body. CIA teaches us that 3 of those 4 responses will almost immediately get you killed. If you try to fight, if you try to run, or if you freeze, you're almost certainly dead. You've lost all of your opportunity. Only when you train your fawn response do you actually start to disarm your opponent. So a lot of what CIA teaches us when it comes to self-defense, when it comes to surveillance detection, when it comes to neutralizing an enemy, when it comes to winning or building trust, it's all based around the idea of strategically and tactically applying this fawn behavior in your sympathetic response.
And I can imagine that a lot of times people in general, they let fear like dictate their life on a day-to-day basis. Like how can people like apply what you just shared in their own daily life to be able to train their mind to not be so drawn to living in fear on a day-to-day basis?
It's a great question, and you kind of have the answer in the question itself, because you specifically said, how do we train our mind? That is the answer. You have to train your mind. And what does training mean? Training means repetition. Training means practice. Training means something that we call stress inoculation, which means exposing yourself to instances of fear intentionally to inoculate yourself, just like you inoculate yourself against the flu or you inoculate yourself against COVID or whatever else. You can inoculate yourself against fear. When it comes down to it, cognitively, your brain has 2 hemispheres. Most of us know that. There's a right brain and a left brain. But what most people don't realize is that your left brain and your right brain work at the same time, but they work at different speeds. Your left logical brain works much, much slower than your right creative emotional brain. So what that means is when you or I see something that scares us, let's say we see a snake and it's coiled up and it's reared and it's ready to strike and it's hissing at us. Both sides of our brain see the snake at the same time, but the two hemispheres work at different speed. On your emotional side, it sees the snake and it immediately is like, I'm going to die. I'm so scared. Stay away from snakes. And it sends that impulse into your body and it creates all the that you don't like about being afraid. The cold sweats, the heart racing, the butterflies in your stomach, the tunnel vision, all of that comes from your emotional brain processing the information faster. But your left brain, your logical brain, is also working at the same time. And it's saying to itself, what kind of snake is it? How big is the snake? Does the snake even have teeth? Have I seen this snake before? And it's your left brain that ultimately lands on the conclusion, oh, that's just a garter snake. And that garter snake isn't going to kill me. It isn't going to hurt me. And for anybody who's had the instance where you immediately startle and then you realize what scared you and you calm down right away, you have felt that response where your left brain works slower than your right brain and ultimately your logic takes over. So the only way that you can speed your left brain up and slow your right brain down so that you can control your fear. Sorry for the long answer here, Doug. But the only way you can do that is through practice and repetition and training. Go do the things that make you scared. Go stand on the high diving board time after time after time until your logical brain says it's really not that far. It's only 10 meters. And your creative emotional brain has a chance to calm down and say, yeah, maybe you're right. Like 10 meters won't kill me. I've watched 100 people dive off of this diving board.
So you referenced at the beginning, that the scariest moment of your life essentially was when you realized that you were being tracked and that people kind of had an idea that you were there to do the thing that you were there to do, right? What did you do like immediately in that moment? Like walk the audience through, like you figure out you're being tracked. You're like, oh my gosh, my life is at risk. Like how did you in that moment calm yourself down and make that move to get yourself into a place of safety?
Absolutely. To be very kind of humiliatingly honest, the first feeling you have is joy because you're like, oh, I can see my surveillance team. It worked, right? My training worked. My experience worked. And I'm catching them. I know I'm under surveillance. And then you give yourself like an internal high five. But then right on the heels of that internal high five where you realize where you're patting yourself on the back for how good you are, right on the back of that, you realize, holy shit, I'm under surveillance. They have every advantage over me. They're watching me. I don't even know how many of them there are. I don't know if there are drones. I don't know if they're tracking my phone. I don't know if they're waiting for me at my hotel. I don't know if there's a van right around the corner that's going to scoop me up. And that's when the panic starts to set in. And in that moment, when you feel your heart rate creep up or jump up and you feel your emotional brain take over, that's where the training sets in. And the training teaches you, I'm getting out of control. My heart rate is increasing. I can feel the sweat on my face. This is going to show I'm going to start shaking and walking fast. I'm going to start to give signs that I'm aware of the surveillance team following me. So you have to start calming those things down. So the first thing that I did after patting myself on the back and realizing that I was then scared immediately afterwards is I started trying to slow my heart rate. Your heart is the key to everything in your body. And if you think about it, it makes total sense. When your heart rate increases, it increases your blood pressure. It increases your body temperature. It increases the amount of oxygen that gets to your brain because blood carries oxygen to the brain. So now your brain goes into like a hyper alert mode. And that hyper awareness really just makes you that much more attuned to what's causing you the stress. Anybody who has anxiety knows exactly what this feels like. You're spooked or you're startled or you're worried about something, and then you get fixated on that thing because your brain becomes hyper aware, hyper attentive, hyper engaged in the thing that's causing you fear. The trick to neutralizing all of that is just to lower your heart rate. So the CIA trained us to lower our heart rate through a breathing technique called box breathing. It also trained us to lower our heart rate through a mental exercise of absolutism. So you're kind of creating a false dichotomy that makes it so that you're not worried about all the what ifs. There's really only two what ifs that matter. What if I succeed? What if I fail? Everything else is just artificial stress. So I start box breathing to lower my heart rate. As I lower my heart rate, I run myself through this false dichotomy. As I go through the false dichotomy, I land on the fact that I really have no other option except to continue to execute fawning behavior in my surveillance detection route like I was trained. And from that moment forward, once you have a decision, every step you get calmer. Every mile that you cover, you understand that much more about your enemy. And even though you can't predict the future, you can predict the present. And at that exact moment, you're not currently being arrested.
What was really interesting to me is like, you know, in your situation, you were going after people that had some like similarities as far as how you were trained, right? And when you're nervous or you're anxious, I know for me, like if I'm like in an important meeting, you know, sometimes my speech will be different because I'm just like, all right, I don't want to say like the wrong thing that's not going to get me the result that I want, right? Like, how did you like stay like calm when talking to people when you knew like in the back of your mind you could say the wrong thing, your tone could be off, and that could be it for you?
A lot of it comes down to preparation. I can't overstate the value of training. Doug, I believe in training so much that when I left CIA, I created a training company, right? Training is what changed my life at CIA. Training is what changed my future of success as a business owner versus a government employee. Training has changed everything from my physical body to my cognition. So I very much believe and value training because of what CIA showed me. And when you train and prepare for whether it's a board meeting or whether it's an interrogation or whether it's an asset uh, briefing in the field, you are the one in control of 90% of what could happen because you're prepared for it. You're prepared for almost everything except for the emergency situation where there's an earthquake that hits your chair meeting, right? Otherwise, anything short of an earthquake, you're ready for it because you've rehearsed it. You've rehearsed them arguing with you. You've rehearsed them saying yes too fast. You've rehearsed, somebody skipping the meeting. You've played it all so many times that by the time you show up, the game is already yours.
And I think that like so many people are like just worried that we're being like tracked. Like people are afraid of like texting certain things on our phone or keeping certain things. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just being tracked or targeted. Like I heard you in a recent podcast say like most of that's just not true. Like the average person is not being tracked like we think we are. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, and I want to be very specific here. You 100% are being tracked. Every person is being tracked, but you're not being tracked by the government. You're being tracked by a commercial entity or a platform or a cell phone provider or a digital interface that you voluntarily carry in your pocket. Your phone knows everything about you, and it's in your phone's best interest to record everything you do. Every time you navigate to a certain location, every time you do a search for a new Japanese restaurant, every time you send a text message to your wife, it wants to track those things. It wants to track whenever a notification comes in from your wife that you got a text message, or it wants to track how often you use your calendar app versus your Google app, right? So make no mistake, you are tracked all the time. When you're being targeted is different than being tracked because tracking is something that's done as cheaply as possible at scale. Targeting is something that's done to very few people when you dedicate a lot of resources. So just as a real quick example, imagine somebody who's an actual criminal is using Google Maps to go from one restaurant to another restaurant to a coffee shop to a shoe store on Monday. So no criminal activity at all. They're just navigating around their neighborhood or they're part of the city. That's what they're doing on Monday. On Tuesday, they commit a crime. On Wednesday, their cell phone gets associated with the crime somehow, and now the law enforcement targets that cell phone. Well, once law enforcement targets that cell phone, it can go back through all the data that the cell phone carrier has collected already. So they reach out to Sprint and Verizon and Google and they say, hey, this phone number is associated with criminal activity. We need everything you have on this phone number. And now, because the criminal spent Monday shopping for shoes and buying coffee, The law enforcement team can identify what neighborhood they probably live in. And if they have home as one of their nav points on their operating system, now they don't even need to look for the person's house. Law enforcement knows the criminal associated with this phone lives at this address. And the investigation gets cut short because they can go straight to the house and they can arrest you and they can bring you in and they can interrogate you. That's what happens when you're targeted. Nobody should worry about being tracked. It sucks, but you actually get a lot of convenience and security from being tracked. And if you get targeted, there is all that you can do about it. You're if you're targeted because they have more resources, more time, and a stronger dedication to finding you than you have to being to going without being caught.
Would somebody have to do something pretty like dramatically bad to be tracked by the government?
To be targeted by the government.
Targeted, yeah.
I want to use these words very
Yes.
specifically, right? And yes, you essentially have to prove to be a threat to society, whether that's a criminal threat or an intelligence threat or an extremist threat. You have to be pretty significant. Now, don't get me wrong, we are starting to move into an age where just simply opposing your government can make you a target. We have to accept that, whether you like it or not, whether you're pro-Trump or not. We are moving into an age where disagreeing with the government on its own kind of makes you a target sometimes. The same rules apply. Once you are targeted, you can't hide.
One of the things I really found fascinating about your book was you pointed out when you were being followed, like talking about surveillance, that it was a good thing essentially if it was the same person showing up, right? Like you knew that like there wasn't going to be anything like going dramatically wrong in that moment because they were just having somebody follow you. You knew that when it was like bad is when they sent like different people like to check you out and stuff. Like walk the audience through that narrative of being surveilled and why it was like a good thing to see the same person.
So when you're trained in detecting surveillance, and I want to compare this to the average person who's worried about a stalker. So it's the closest thing that I think we have in the normal everyday world is when someone that we don't like is following us. You know, an ex-boyfriend, an ex-wife, the brother of a girlfriend that we hurt or something, or some friend of somebody who we beat up in high school, whatever. When someone is stalking you, essentially it's one person, and that one person has to follow you because they don't have anybody else helping them. So when you see that one face over and over again, it becomes very confident to you who the problem is. And that's important because if you know who the problem is, you can report the problem. You can report it to the principal. You can report it to your boyfriend or girlfriend. You can report it to the cops, whatever. So seeing the same face over and over again is a good thing because it builds your confidence and it builds your ability to describe that face in great detail. When you're part of an operation where there's a team of people following you, that team of people are trained to stay far enough away that you can never really see their face. So we rely on something that we call a profile. And a profile is how you describe a person without using their face. So just take a second to imagine your dad. Now take your dad's face away from him. How would you describe your dad? That is his profile. You might say, oh, my dad's about 6'2", 190 pounds. He's balding or he's got gray hair, but only on the sides. He wears a goatee. He likes baggy clothes. He always wears cowboy boots. What you're describing is a profile. So when you're being professionally tailed, you're identifying people based on a profile. The problem is that professional surveillance change their profile over time. They change out a thin jacket for a thick jacket, ball cap for no cap, sunglasses are on, sunglasses are off. They know how to change their profile so they can blend in even better. But when you start to see those changing faces, that's scarier because you can't describe who the person is. You don't actually know who the threat is. You only know that the threat is there and that the threat is real. So it's tough because who are you going to tell? Even if you try to report it to the police, if you try to report it to your friends, what are you going to say? You're going to say something stupid like, there was a guy following me. And they're going to say, describe the guy. And you're going to be like, I can't. He was big. You've seen this in the comedy movies, right? Where they're like, oh yeah, it was a big guy and it was dark outside. Nobody's going to take you seriously. And that can be scary.
Was it accurate to say the faster somebody responds, the more likely you'll be able to trust them?
It's better to say that the faster somebody responds, the more you know that they are being transparent in their response. If, for example, if they're a salesman, they've rehearsed their response. If they're a politician, they've been given talking points about their response. But the good news is, even if you don't know if what they're saying is true or rehearsed, you know that they're willing to respond quickly to your question. So you can ask another question about a completely different topic, and they should respond the same way. One of the tools that we're taught at CIA to identify if somebody is lying is you basically ask a series of questions and you see if they respond the same way with the same tempo, the same pacing, and the same energy for all the questions. What's your favorite food? Where were you on Saturday night? How did you feel about the second Trump election? And where are you going on your next vacation? If they answer all of those questions at the same pace, tempo, speed, and transparency, then you know they're probably being honest. If they change up their response, if they start using filler words, or if they start slowing down their thought process, then you know that they're trying to shape something about that response.
So it all comes down to like pattern recognition, right? Like just trying to like gauge somebody's baseline and then seeing how they react when you're testing that baseline.
That's a fantastic way of simplifying my word salad there, man. You are looking for baseline patterns, and then you're looking for deviations from the pattern. The only tricky part is that sometimes the pattern that you identify is the false pattern. It's the rehearsed pattern. So you have to be able to add enough variety to crack through the pattern to find the real baseline.
And how do you tell the difference between if somebody is like lying to you versus just overthinking their answer because they want to just sound smart?
That's one of the reasons why I don't call this lie detection, because it's not really lie detection. To really understand if someone's lying or fabricating information, it takes more than one data indicator. That's why I don't believe in micro expressions. I don't believe in most of the stuff you see on YouTube about how you identify a liar. It's not as simple as, do they blink too many times or look up and to the left? You have to actually take multiple data points and put them all together. Look at their body physical gestures, look at their blink rate, look at their mouth movements, look at their eye gestures, look at their body posture, hear the words they're saying, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're trying to find out if someone's lying to you, you want to look for multiple overlapping indicators of deceit or dishonesty. So you want to see them show body language and verbal intonation and eye movements that all indicate deceit, not just one.
So what are those specifically that you would look for? Like if you were asking somebody a question or talking to them, like what kind of cues would you pay attention to?
So I'm going to give you an example, but I want to make sure everybody understands this is just one example. It's not a silver bullet for all liars, right? Generally speaking, when people are being honest, depending on the kind of conversation you're having. So let's be very, very specific. The best way to find out if someone's being honest is if you are the one asking the question. If you're engaged in a storytelling conversation, it's very hard to tell if they're lying. But if you ask the question, you can increase the proper probabilities that you're identifying a liar. So you ask the question, and then you intentionally ask a question that has to do with chronology. So if you're asking a boyfriend or a girlfriend if they've cheated, you might say something like, hey, where were you on Friday night? Where were you Friday at about 10 o'clock? That question forces them to have to refer back to a chronological order in their brain. When you see them, they will most likely look up and to the left. And they'll do that because in their brain, they're referring to a chronology, like a timeline, in the same way that they would look at a timeline on a sheet of paper. So first, if you see them look up and to the left, you know that they're trying to honestly reference their chronology. If you ask a chronological question and they look up and to the right, then you know they're not referencing chronology at all. They are not trying to think of what actually happened. They're trying to create something new. They're referencing the right side, the creative side of their brain. So that's a very simple first data point to determine if they're being honest or not. Are they referencing chronological order, or are they referencing creative endeavor? But that doesn't mean that it's a silver bullet, right? Some people look up and to the right because that's their baseline, that's their habit. Maybe they're dyslexic and that's what they think is the original part of chronology. So the next thing you want to look for is body movement. If you ask somebody a question and they start to close off their body, they cross their arms, they touch their face, they cover their neck. These are all physical body movements that show that someone is trying to distance themselves from a threat. They're trying to shield themselves. If someone's honestly answering a question, they don't feel the need to protect themselves, right? So especially if you ask, where were you on Friday at 10 o'clock? And they cross their arms and cover their throat and look up and to the right, you're like, oh, this son of a is about to make something up, right? Like there's multiple indicators here that they're about to change their story. Now, or tell me a story. If you then add on to that what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, Doug, how fast someone speaks, how much energy is in their intonation, the type of vocabulary they use. When somebody truly is honestly answering, where was I Friday at 10 o'clock? I think I was at the bar with my friend Isaiah drinking our second scotch for the night. And the scotches there were really good because it was a scotch bar. That sounds like an honest answer with honest pacing, without filler words, that was delivered at about the same speed and energy as the rest of the conversation. And then you pair that up with the body movements and you pair that up with the eye gestures, the micro expressions. Whereas if you ask somebody the same question and their answer is something like, wow, Friday at 10 o'clock is hard to remember. I think perhaps I was like with my mom, or I think I was definitely doing something with my parents. That's a completely different change in pattern and baseline conversation. So you're looking for a group of gestures and indicators that tell a more complete answer.
There's a lot of like really good seasoned liars out there. And is that why you think it's important to have these multiple data points so that they can try to catch somebody when they're off their game or something?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Amateur liars cannot control multiple levels of deceit. They can't control their body and their facial expressions and their tonality and their response, their creative response. They can't control them all at the same time. But amateur lie detectors also can't focus on all four areas at the same time. So what ends up happening to a lot of people who get into bad relationships is the liar in the relationship is good at one thing, and the victim of the bad relationship is trying to detect lies in only one area, and that one area is where the bad guy is good. So all these girls out there in bad relationships with lying men, they all think that they can identify the guy when he's lying based off of what he's saying. That's not going to happen. You have to look at something else, and vice versa. A skilled liar is a challenge, Doug. And a skilled liar you can only catch if you are able to observe all of the patterns in not necessarily the same time, but in a short period of time so that you can identify the signs of deceit.
Right. Yeah. I think it's way more important to pay attention to things other than just words, right? So that you can actually determine if somebody is truly lying. I'm curious, like I know in your career in the CIA, you had to lie. And how did you balance that with like being in a relationship, being married? Like, have you had to like unlearn the pattern of lying with living your life now?
Yeah, it's funny because when CIA, I was mentioning how CIA puts us through a pretty rigorous psychological and personality exam before they ever hire us. Part of what those exams are looking for is a predisposition to lying. That doesn't mean they're looking for liars. It means it's looking for people who have the right psychological recipe to be good at lying. I was not a deceptive or deceitful kid. I was actually so scared of my mom and dad that they kind of scared the lies out of me. Um, I would hide things and I would omit things, but I would never blind faced, open faced lie about things because it was just too scary and too intimidating. Well, when CIA recruited me and they brought me into the briefing and they started bringing me into training courses, along with other people just like me who were also painfully honest kids, they started telling us like, hey, this is why you've been honest. You've been honest your whole life, not because you're afraid to lie. It's not because you're actually honest. You've been honest because you have discovered that it's easier to just not say the truth rather than try to make up a lie. And I'm telling you, man, You look around an audience of like 200 people in the auditorium, and all the heads are like nodding. People are like, oh, yeah, that's me. I don't lie openly and blind and like boldly. I just don't tell the truth. I just keep quiet. I omit what I know. It's called a lie through omission. So you start to learn these things about yourself, and that creates a foundation where CIA teaches us how to systematically lie, how to fabricate professionally, so that when we get in the field, we can lie. But when we're back at home, we can just be ourselves. We can be more transparent. So I say that as the first answer to your question. It's not that we were good at lying, it's that we were predisposed to have the ability to lie. And the second half of your question, does that make it hard to have relationships afterwards? One of the things that's really important to me is that when I put myself into a relationship that I really care about, I put myself into a relationship that can handle the real me. So just like we were talking earlier about forcing that artificial divide and choosing between producers and consumers in your lifestyle, I mean, that is something I stick to very rigorously. I don't befriend anybody who doesn't help me produce. And if they help me produce, I create a number of artificial divides where I'm like, hey, are you with me or are you and going away? And I only want to be with the people who are 100% in line with what I care about and what I value. And that's why I have such a small but powerful group of peers and friends.
How can people like feel some sense of joy without like acting like a child when they've spotted somebody lying? I mean, I like, do they just end the relationship? Do they just walk away and not say anything? Is that the best thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, if what you're really saying, I think, Doug, is how do you find closure when you know you've been victim of an abuse, you've been a victim of deceit or fabrication? That's a totally valid question because everybody deserves closure. The way that you find that closure is by recognizing that the person lying to you, you now know them in stark, unequivocal fact. They are not a productive relationship for you. So you can cut that relationship off without any effort at all. You can stop taking their phone calls. You can block their number so they don't send you text messages or phone calls. You can tell them to their face, "Hey, it's been great talking to you. I'm actually going to be busy for the next few months, but I'll catch up with you when things slow down again." But what you want to do, the closure you're looking for, is to cut that person out of your life so that you can dedicate your resources to more productive relationships. It might feel very gratifying or feel joyful to like spit it in their face. But the thing is, if they're a liar and you tell them they're lying, then they're not going to agree with you. They're going to be like, no, 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 you don't understand. I just misspoke, or you're misunderstanding. You're not really hearing the whole truth. They're going to blame it on you, and you're not going to get the joy or the closure you're looking for. You're going to actually end up putting more resources into trying to kill the relationship than if you were to just say, hey, give me a call next week. And what you do secretly is just block their phone number.
And do you think there's any like wiggle room, like if you're in a relationship and you catch somebody in like a white lie, to hold them accountable so that they can maybe improve and not do that again?
I mean, they're not, everybody lies. Everybody's going to lie again. CIA teaches us that there's different types of lies. White lies are the most common lie, and they're something that we all do all the time. So if you have any expectation that the people that are in the relationship with you are always going to be honest with you, you're silly. They're lies of omission and white lies are two of the most common lies that you're going to see. And they're two of the hardest lies to identify because they're so low risk and they don't often require anybody to even verbalize the fabrication. So I would say if you are the kind of person that really wants to win the argument, then you're already focused on the wrong thing and you're probably not destined for success anyways. So there's nothing I can do to help you. If you're the kind of person that recognizes, oh, you know what? White lies are probably far more common than I think they are. And I do have to learn to just accept lies of omission because that's what people are going to do. And I've got more important, productive things to focus on. You have a real possibility of being successful in the future.
Yeah, and I think that people essentially are just oblivious, right? And they just want to accept that everyone is going to treat them right and that everyone is just to see the best in people. That's what we're taught, right? And what I'm hearing you say is don't see the best in people. Like kind of have this, like don't be cold and turned off, but have this assumption that that person could be manipulating you or being deceptive towards you.
Yeah, I mean, have the assumption that everybody is being deceptive for different reasons all the time. Sometimes people are being deceptive because they think it's going to keep them safe. Sometimes people are being deceptive because they're actually embarrassed about what they really think. Sometimes people are being deceptive because they feel like they need it to survive. You can't take the deception away from somebody. It's like taking away their clothing. We wear clothing because we don't want to be vulnerable to the elements. Well, we all practice deception all the time because we don't want to be vulnerable to the environment around us. And that's totally human and totally natural. The advantage comes when you're one of the few people who predict, anticipate, and accept deception, rather than one of the majority of people who are always trying to find it and defeat it. You're never going to defeat deception. It's like trying to defeat oxygen.